had lived with the De Winters in their large house near Crouch End, obedient to Miriam's strict demands that bordered on religious fanaticism, dodging her uncle's increasingly determined efforts to put his soft, pudgy hands on her body. It had been a game of wits, to keep from being alone with him, but she'd never realized how very serious it was, how determined and vicious Horace de Winter could truly be. Her face was numb from the blow he'd struck her. She ought to pull herself together, she knew it. The maid, who'd had the bad timing to appear, had taken one look at the body on the floor and run off, screaming. It would be only a matter of minutes before the noise she was making summoned the inhabitants of the old inn. Emma wondered idly whether they'd drag her out into the stormy evening and hang her there and then. It might be preferable to facing Cousin Miriam. Someone was watching her. She wanted to summon the energy to look, but for the moment she was distracted by all the blood on her hands. She had never thought he'd lunge for her like that he'd doubt her determination. She could still feel the blade sinking into his flesh. Killoran's mood was not particularly sunny that winter afternoon. For one thing, he had a terrific headache, and the bottle of cognac he'd brought with him to cheer him during the journey didn't seem to make any difference, except to make his head pound even more fiercely. He'd regretted his acceptance of Cousin Nathaniel's visit within one day of agreeing to it, but he'd been oddly loath to cancel it, and he'd let the invitation stand. If Matthew Hepburn, a country squire in the tiny Northumberland village of St. Just, had been a more worldly soul, he would have known better than to send his only son, Nathaniel, to the care of his distant cousin, James Michael Patrick, the Earl of Killoran, for a bit of town bronze. The connection was so remote, it was almost non-existent. Hepburn's wife's sister was cousin to Killoran's aunt's husband. And indeed, Killoran could have ignored the request, since all the principals in the matter were long dead. He didn't need Hepburn's money or gratitude, and he was never one to let himself be bothered by responsibility or guilt. But he accepted the imminent arrival of one Nathaniel Hepburn with a kind of cool grace, for one simple reason. He was bored. The cards always fell his way. The women did the same. He had conquered society, with the small and unlamentable exception of the proper young females, and he no longer had any interest in removing himself from his comfortable house on Curzon Street in London and returning to the charred ruins of Killoran House, the run-down horse farm that made up the bulk of his inheritance. If it were up to him, he'd never set foot in Ireland again. He had no family left, no land worth anything, no ties. He would die an Englishman. And if his current boredom didn't abate, that happy day would come damned soon. Nathaniel Hepburn, aged 23, sounded, according to his father's spiky flowing script, like an absolute prince of young English manhood. Sober, earnest, hard-working, intelligent, determined to learn a bit of the ways of the world, he would then retire back to Northumberland and take up the reins of his father's comfortable estate. If he hadn't been drunk at the time, Killoran would have simply ignored the letter. Unfortunately, he'd taken to drinking deeply of late. It didn't fill the emptiness inside him or relieve his monumental ennui, but it made him less aware of the deficiencies in his elegant, comfortable life. Instead, Killoran decided to welcome his splendid young cousin into the ways of London society. He would open